This is an RNZ podcast.
They say it takes a village to raise a child. I'm Kathryn Ryan, and here we draw on my conversations with experts on 9 to Noon to help you navigate family life. Well, now to the issue of how to deal with adult children, particularly the ones who may still be living under your roof. It's a trend on the rise around the world. In the UK, research into the boomerang phenomenon found 2/3 of childless single adults aged 20 to 34 had either never left or moved back into the family home due to a precarious job market and sky-high rents. A Victoria University study last year into what happened during the main lockdown in New Zealand found 38% of 18 to 24-year-olds moved back in with one or more of their parents. So what happens when your kids have flown the nest only to return, or if they end up staying on while they undertake tertiary study or training? What are the house rules? What is parenting in this circumstance? Jenny Hale is a senior family coach at Parenting Place and is with us. Good morning, Jenny.
Morena, Kathryn, great to be here.
You're welcome. I think you're normally an expert on the younger end of the of the family spectrum, but this is a really emerging trend, isn't it?
It is, and it does pose a few problems for families. Some families do really well, and I think others struggle because they weren't prepared, or maybe it was hard before when their kids were younger, and it continues to be hard, and there'll be some reasons for that. But it certainly is the landscape that we're looking at now, is for adult children to be at home longer than perhaps other generations.
Well, there's two perhaps standout reasons. One is the whole business of trying to save to buy a house, or even just to have a place you can live that's livable and affordable. And the other is the impact of COVID itself. That's an extraordinary number, the number of young adults who moved back to their families during lockdown. Some of it may have been choice for, just to be supported during that time. We know a lot of all the uni students just about had to go home. But still, it's a new experience when you thought things had moved on. It's also becoming a trend with its own name, kippers. Kids and parents' pockets eroding retirement savings. Now, is that a healthy way to look at things? Slightly cynically.
It's not probably the best. I think if we look at it playfully, we can joke about it because there's an element of truth in it. But if we want something to work, I think we've got to give it a respectful name, and we've actually got to make sure that there are elements about living at home that work for both parties, rather than it being a big drain and an emptying of the pockets of the parents who own the home. So, yeah, kind of cute name, but I think that underneath we want it to be better than just having money draining out and kids using the home and parents feeling resentful about having their kids at home.
One of the ways to, I guess, approach any question in parenting is to put yourself in the shoes of each of the parties. And when you know what you're dealing with, you can strategise as to how to deal with it.
Exactly.
So let's talk about what's happening, perhaps, in the case of the parents who are thinking, look, worked hard, got this far, looking forward to a different phase of life, but also, gee, I really think it's time this person or this person got out and stood on their own 2 feet. That can be a feeling that is simmering somewhere, even if you're understanding the situation and things are going okay. What are the other range of feelings or emotions that parents might be having?
I think sometimes parents feel really drawn to help at a time like this, that they realise that the lampposts have shifted, and it is no longer a given that your kids will be able to buy their own home or live independently or be able to afford to attend uni and be in a reasonable renting situation. So there is a generosity, I think, in parents to think, what can I do? How can I help? The landscape is different, things have changed. But I also think that one, similar to the one you mentioned, is that where parents feel like, darn, we really had counted on a bit more freedom, and this was the golden years for us, and we're not sure how we how we handle this. We know our kids need our help, but we don't know if we really are up for that, and we don't know how long it's going to be for. And some parents are really a bit exhausted. I think they've been, if you've had teenagers who were tricky, you're thinking, I just need a break from my kids for a while. So, yeah, and you might be feeling also that sense of kids need to learn how to be independent. For instance, it's one of the questions I ask parents when they come and see me for a family coaching session. I ask them, what's the dream you have for your kids? How do you want them to grow and develop? If they were 18, I name an age, and then we laugh because it's not likely to be 18 now. What would you like to see within your kids? And independence comes out all the time. There is a big, big push and drive and sense that parents want to feel that their kids can stand on their own 2 feet. So that'll be a big motivation for parents. Do we really want to be caught in this and not be creating or maybe we're enabling this dependence for longer than it's really good for our kids?
There is that, but what's complicating things now is you can't just say, go and get a flat for goodness sake and get on with it, because they may turn around and say, yeah, but A, I can't find one, or B, it's going to cost this. But do you still at some point have to draw the line and say, yes, it's not fair, and yes, it's expensive, however, there's the sense that there's the kid who doesn't want to leave perhaps because they know they're onto a really good thing. And that's where a parent might be saying, actually, it's not good for them to still be here when they are 25, 35, I'm well aware of one of those, and onwards. How are you going to have that conversation and how are you going to sow that seed when you are in a circumstance where everything feels so loaded against them?
Yeah, and this is where parenting often feels really hard because I think you've just got to welcome the tension. There'll be a tension between, boy, we could really help out here, and we've got the resources. And then the dream and the goal that you have that your kids will stand on their own 2 feet and will learn to develop some mastery over things they haven't yet learnt. I've got to say, Kathryn, I think that every family is different, and sometimes your kids have really made great strides towards independence, and they've got a part-time job, and they know how to save, and they know how to put the washing machine on and contribute. But there'll be some families who feel like, look, for one reason or another, we've enabled our kids to just take a ride, and we actually need to put in a boundary now, and we need to help them move on. And so I think a robust, tender conversation that doesn't start with, we've had enough. More, we care deeply about you and feel like this is the opportunity that you need to further develop some skills that will set you up for life. You know, I really think we can paint a dream for kids, and we can communicate that well. Or if we wait too long, we'll sort of blow our tops and say, that's it, out. And I don't think it has to come to that. I think it's good if we actually frame it differently and get him before it turns to custard.
It's very wise, and it also, you can start just the messaging that gets them ready for the fact that your expectation is they're going to move on, and you can help them help them saying, hey, look, and so-and-so's moving into a flat, might be looking for a flatmate, just get involved in conversations that don't directly say move out, but are working towards a presumption that that's where things are heading. It normalises an expectation. Yeah. That could go on for quite a while, of course, but is it a good way to begin to build the expectation rather than, as you say, waiting till you snap?
Yeah, I think it's great to sow the seeds, and we kind of need to be doing this throughout our parenting, is that we're looking at the next stage, whether it's going from kindy to school or school to intermediate to college. You're kind of framing things so that they know change is coming. And I think sometimes we forget to have those conversations with our kids that just say, this is what we're looking forward to. And And that's when parents start to probably remove some of the trainer wheels or the supports that have always been there, but not as a shock. I think one of the great things about parenting is that we get these windows all the time to be sowing the seeds of this is what's coming, this is what's next, this is what we're looking forward to, this is what you'll need. Probably it's easy to step too far and start looking for the flat and looking for the job and sort of still governing things. And I think we've got to let our kids make some of these decisions which are scary, but where you realise I'm no longer in that position where I will hold everything together. I've got to let the rope out. When our daughter said after she'd finished school that she wanted to go overseas for a year and do a sort of a youth program where she'd live in another country, learn a language, it was a bit of a surprise, but I thought actually we've been preparing her for this, that there is a time when there's no more school to attend. There's a break between now and uni. And, I had to sort of sit on my hands a bit because I was actually a bit surprised that she'd taken a bigger leap than I had hoped for, but it actually turned out really well. So, yeah, by all means, I think let them in on your hopes and dreams.
It's actually a really interesting point that the inverse can happen, and that you're in that tricky transition where you are the parent, yes, but your child is becoming or is recognised as an adult. Let's say that adult kids are still at home for one reason or another, or perhaps they've left and come back. What is it that causes friction, and what's some of the sensible things you can put in place to reduce the risk of friction on both sides?
I think anything that is assumed will happen, taken for granted, or kind of not really shared openly. So we call these pretend agreements, where no one's really front-footed it in a way. So it might be who's going to, let's start with paying something towards rent if you're living at home. And I'd qualify that with, I think if your kids are earning something, there should be some amount paid towards living in a home. And that may sound tough, but there is a sense that you're preparing your kids for the real world. And if they're earning, they should be contributing. And some families have a really small amount and some have a bigger amount. But when our son was still at home until he was 24, he was studying medicine. So while he was studying, he didn't pay. But once he started earning, he did. And I think that's one that can help, because rent's important. So is, food, contributing towards food, and then probably chores, just keeping the place reasonably tidy. I think it's really important that those things are discussed. And for some families, there won't be a big transition because there's sort of been a level of respect anyway, so nothing big should change. But if you don't mention that you're expecting to be, receiving money or food or them helping out, and if you're not specific enough about it, it will run its own course. And you can find parents thinking, oh my goodness, we are really tired of the mess and the fact that friends are coming around and no one is, contributing, and we've just been taken for a ride. And that's an unfortunate place to get. So I often think that I'll encourage parents throughout their parenting journey to have what I call a reset. Kind of a reset conversation where this is where we find ourselves. This is the part that isn't working. How can we modify? What do we need to do so this is working for all of us?
Okay, we've got some questions coming in, but I want to use some of the questions that actually prompted us to focus on this in the first place. And some of them were financial. How much should you pay? Should you help out your adult at home financially? Do you pay their university fees, or does that take away the responsibility they take for their study? How long do you pay for their medical fees? Do you pay when you all go out for dinner? Now, they're all financial questions, but they're good ones. And is this a sort of phased approach where you begin to do deals over how much of the financial contribution's coming from you and how much they're contributing themselves? How do you work out how to gradually transfer more financial responsibility to your adult at home?
Great one. I think that you do phase it because you actually don't know how long you're going to be in this position for. So it's a little bit like having a memorandum of understanding. I think you start by saying, like we might have said something like, well, I know families who are saying, we're happy to pay for half your uni fees, and then when you've got a job, this is how it will change. But I think it has to be open to changing as circumstances change. And the other thing I think parents have to look at is, am I empowering my child, my young adult, or am I actually disempowering them by always fronting up with the money? And one of the tasks of parenting is to kind of grow kids who can stand on their own 2 feet, who feel confident and are resilient and are able to problem solve and think for themselves. So if what you're doing is snuffing that out, I think it's time to have a reset.
It needs to be realistic because of the financial burdens on them, but the trajectory is they are contributing a fair amount to each of these things with a view to gradually taking on more and more. That would make sense, wouldn't it, right?
Yeah.
Look, this is another interesting one. Do you look after their kids so they can go back to work?
Yeah, that's a yes and a no. And I think parents have to look at their own lives. A lot of parents are still working. In our situation, I've got 3 grandchildren. And I have helped take care of each of them for a period of time without losing my job, but just going down some hours. But I really thought that through. And what was good about it wasn't an assumption that I would do it. It was a request, which is a respectful way to ask. I think when you just fall into an assumption, that's where resentment grows. And it was always on the table as something we would consider again if it wasn't working. So it's not a blanket, yes, I will look after your children for the whole week. I mean, some families may be able to afford that and they want to do that, and I think that's great. But some families don't want to do that. They don't want to look after the kids. I know of a family who the parents, and these were parents in their 60s, were asked whether they would look after the child if the couple had another baby. And it felt like that's a really big call to ask parents to step in, and they were deciding whether to have another child depending on what the answer was. And
it's an awful lot of responsibility.
It's a heck of a lot of responsibility. You've got your own life.
I mean, I think it's the answer's kind of like, yes, you might, if you want to, as much as you want to. And as you say, the big thing is not being taken for granted, which is something that needs to be continually under review. It needs to work for both parties, right? It may be a wonderful way for a grandparent to have a relationship with their grandchildren. It may also become something that chews up all their time and they feel taken for granted. So you've got to think about yourself as well as what you can contribute. Great. I mean, there's a lot of guilt underpinning some of these questions. Is it okay to sell the family home and move overseas? Well, frankly, yes. Wouldn't you say?
I think that's a little bit drastic.
It might be a wrench.
To have to go that far to actually sell your home, so that wouldn't it be better to be able to communicate?
No, not linked. Separate question. The parents are saying, "Can we go and live overseas? We want to." Of course you can, and it may well be a wrench, but you don't. I mean, it's the sense that you're permanently parenting, really, isn't it? In some ways you are, but does that mean you can't go and do something you want to do with your own life? I mean, how do you answer that, Jenny?
Yeah, well, I do think guilt's a big player in that, and sometimes we are so conditioned to do things because we hate the feeling of letting someone down, or gosh, they need me, or whatever. But we actually do have to stop and think, why am I making this decision? Is it because I'm too scared to say, actually, we'd really love 6 months in France? one day. And I think we should be able to make calls that are independent from some of the ties that we might feel, and certainly we shouldn't do them on a guilt factor. And I was trying to sort of also say, Kathryn, that don't wait for it to be unbearable so that you have to shift overseas.
And look, family is family, and if everyone's doing great, but if someone's having a particular crisis, the normal parental response, the normal family response would be that you change your life to assist them, right? But
Absolutely.
I think this is in the context of, if everyone's going okay, do I need to be here because I'm the parent and the grandparent? Another really good one is about the changing relationship, and this can begin at 18 or 19, or if your kid's still at home then, of shifting from being parent to maybe a little bit more friend. This is what the question is like. Do you ever really become the friend when you're the parent? Can you be a friendly parent? And another thing is, how much of your worries and concerns do you share? That's something you may share much more with an adult child than with a younger child. But there's a large dose of it depends, doesn't it? And you're always the parent, aren't you?
Yeah, I think you are always a parent, but I actually find it very easy to be friends as well. And that might be that you've established boundaries early on and there's a respectful kind of relationship going on. So, yeah, it does depend. But there is no reason why your kids can't be, you can't be really close, and they can be someone that you would talk to about stuff. I think that this is sort of personal experience. I think that I've almost dropped that I'm your parent kind of a role to more of an equal now, where our kids are, late 30s, 40s. So I just feel that they are, in a situation where I would talk to them about stuff. There is always stuff I wouldn't talk to them about as well. I don't think they've got an open, they should have an open kind of window into everything that goes on. But there is a connection and a closeness that I think is really beautiful to have with your kids.
I think the remaining a parent thing is when crisis hits, and it will in their lives, that's when you'll feel that instinct, that instinct kick in again, that it might be a divorce, or it might be illness, or it might be this or that, but that's when that instinct comes back again. But again, it's situational. A couple of great comments to finish here. This emailer says, I'm an adult child living with my father. I moved in after returning from overseas to go to uni. I feel the stigma of saying I live at home, but I'm now much closer to my dad, and his house actually gets cleaned. Dad seems to think cleanliness is a disorder. We grumble from time to time, like when he flooded the kitchen floor last week, but it works well for both of us. And the best one, I think, comes from Tony. My wife and I have decided we don't want children. We're telling them tonight after dinner. Thank you, Jenny Hale of the Parenting Place.